Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. It's great to see you again. I can't really see you, but I'm assuming that you're there. Um, Today is a really, really big episode in that we are talking about what was called the Camp of Israel and is now we call Zion's Camp. This is a sort of an expedition that the early Latter-day Saints used to try to reclaim their lands in Independence, Missouri. Now, this is a very big story and a very pivotal moment in church history. And so this episode might be the longest one that I ever do, just because there's a lot of stories surrounding this. The good news is that we are going to cover 6 months worth of time in 1834. And the other good news is that Zion's Camp will come to an end here. So I'm hoping to get back to maybe a little bit more concise stories. So if I speak a little quickly, I apologize, but we're going to be going through sections 102 through 105 in the Doctrine and Covenants. There's a lot of very interesting things here. One letter in particular that's very interesting. And we also get introduced to Zelph, if you know who Zelph is. Those of you who may or may not believe might have heard of a little something called Zelph on a Shelf, which is, uh, I think, very clever. But anyway, so we're going to be talking about Zelph today. So if you've heard that name before, we'll get into that. All right, so for our first part, we're going to be talking about uh, some things leading up to section 102 of the Doctrine and Covenants. So we are in 1834. So in our last episode, we got rid of 1833. That's done, and so we're in a lot of things actually. So we're going to be getting into a new volume of the document series of the Joseph Smith papers. So if you're following along from a publication standpoint, you've gone through a few volumes already. But I wanted to point out something that I was really excited about. So last night, my family and I went to a community affair. It was kind of like hot dogs out in the park at the beginning of school because it is now approaching fall in Utah here. And I met a woman by the name of Sharon. And Sharon, I'm sorry, I forgot your last name. But Sharon is actually a part of the Joseph Smith Papers project and works on the website experience. And if it wasn't for Sharon, this would not happen. So I heap praises upon you, Sharon, for all the work that you do. It was really fun to talk to you. And I hope I'm embarrassing you. You were just absolutely lovely. And I really, really appreciate what you do for all of us in preserving a digital copy of the Joseph Smith Papers, which is a titanic, gargantuan, uh, endeavor that has blessed me. And I hope everybody enjoying this will also thank Sharon. So leave a comment for Sharon. She's a very lovely lady. So we're going to first talk about a prayer that we get in Joseph Smith's journal. So for a paper's introduction, this is the journal that spans from 1832 to 1834. There's going to be a rather large gap here in entries because he does go on Zion's Camp. In this particular case, it is the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery. So even in his own journal, he still has scribes just because he struggled with this. Probably recorded on some piece of paper, and then he copies it into this journal. So what is the introduction to this? Well, the Joseph Smith Papers, and thank you, Sharon. I can copy paste this with your help. It says, this prayer by Joseph Smith and 5 of his close associates address several related concerns, including their personal safety and that of other church members, the protection of the church's press, and the growing debt facing members of the united firm. All of these issues were connected to the real and threatened violence church members had been subjected to for several months. Now we get issues like Missouri, now brewing in Kirtland, which is a tough one. So we get this from the historical introduction. B.F. Norris, a resident of nearby Mentor, Ohio, who was not a member of the Church of Christ, corroborated Joseph Smith's reports writing on the 6th of January, 1834, that a group had, quote, threatened mobbing church members in Kirtland. Norris also observed that, quote, Smith has 4 or 5 armed men to guard him every night. 2 days later, Oliver Cowdery reported that vigilantes had fired a cannon at midnight in an attempt to intimidate the members of the church. No one was frightened, Cowdery explained, but all prepared to defend themselves if they made a sally upon our houses. So if you've forgotten, Joseph Smith was dragged out of his home by a group of men, beaten, tarred, and feathered, which also killed his adopted son. So I don't know if the bodyguard thing is true, but it definitely would be justified, I would say. A lot of this, however, was brought upon by Dr. Philastus Hurlburt. So we get this, again, historical introduction. Hurlbut allegedly threatened to kill Joseph Smith in mid-December, prompting Joseph Smith to file a complaint against him on the 21st of December, 1833, with Kirtland Justice of the Peace John C. Dowan. A hearing on the issue was set for the 13th of January, 1834, 2 days after this prayer was offered. So they did go to court over this. We'll get into that in a moment. So footnote to the introduction here that we get. Hurlbut was lecturing about the exposing the Mormon imposters. So here's from the introduction. He also announced his intention to publish a book, quote, which would divulge the whole secret of the supposedly fraudulent origins of the Book of Mormon. Some of those present at the lecture contributed funds to Hurlbut's project, and an anti-Mormon committee in the area employed Hurlbut, quote, to ascertain the real origin of the Book of Mormon and to examine the validity of Joseph Smith's claims to the character of a prophet. Hurlbut traveled through Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts in search for Spalding's manuscript. He collected several affidavits from people in New York testifying against the character of Joseph Smith and his family, and he claimed to have found Spalding's manuscript, though he never published it. Bummer. Never found it, did you? Anyway, so this was a very famous one that basically the Book of Mormon is based on something that a man named Spalding wrote. But as you can see, at least Dr. Hurlbut never seemed to get around to it. I wonder what he did with the money. Anyway, so content and footnotes for this. Frederick G. Williams, Newell K. Whitney, John Johnson, Oliver Cowdery, and Orson Hyde, plus Joseph Smith, were involved in this prayer. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people gathered in prayer, and it's broken into parts. So it's not very long, but I'll just get into it. So their prayer apparently was, firstly, that the Lord would grant that our lives might be precious in his sight, that he would watch over our persons and give his angels charge concerning us and our families, that no evil nor unseen hand might be permitted to harm us. Secondly, that the Lord would also hold the lives of all the united firm and not suffer that any of them shall be taken. Thirdly, that the Lord would grant that our brother Joseph might prevail over his enemy, Dr. P. Hurlbut, who has threatened his life, whom brother Joseph has caused to be taken with a precept, that the Lord would fill the heart of the court with the spirit to do justice, and cause that the law of the land may be magnified in bringing him to justice. So footnote 1 for this. Precept here refers to a, quote, command in writing by a justice of peace or other officer for bringing a person or records before him, unquote. On the 21st of December, 1833, Joseph Smith filed a complaint with Kirtland Justice of the Peace John Dowan, whose decision in a preliminary hearing stated that Joseph Smith, quote, had reason to fear that Dr. P. Hurlbut would beat, wound, or kill him. Dowan, who then issued a warrant for Hurlbut's arrest, later claimed that when Hurlbut said he would kill Joseph Smith, quote, he meant he would kill Mormonism. I guess that makes it all better. Fourthly, from the prayer, that the Lord would provide, in the order of his providence, the bishop of this church with means sufficient to discharge every debt that the firm owes in due season, that the church may not be brought into disrepute. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. Sorry. And the saints be afflicted by the hands of their enemies. Fifthly, that the Lord would protect our printing press from the hands of evil men, and give us means to send forth his word, even his gospel, that the ears of all may hear it, and also that we may print his scriptures, and also that he would give those who were appointed to conduct the press wisdom sufficient that the cause may not be hindered, but that men's eyes may thereby be opened to see the truth. Sixthly, that the Lord would deliver Zion and gather in his scattered people to possess it in peace, and also while in their dispersion that he would provide for them that they perish not with hunger nor cold, and finally, that God, in the name of Jesus, would gather his elect speedily and unveil his face, that his saints might behold his glory and dwell with him. Amen. There's your prayer from Joseph Smith's journal. The next thing that we get in the papers chronologically is from the 22nd of January. It's a letter to the church now in Clay County. So the church members were sort of exiled from the Independence area, and now they are in Clay County, Missouri. Saints need to know what to do. The governor's not really ready to do anything to help. They sent letters to President Andrew Jackson, who also declined to help. They let the Missouri Saints know that Hurlbut was no longer an issue due to some court decisions against him. So Hurlbut had to pay damages and also the court costs for attacking Joseph Smith. So that was the church letter to the church in Clay County. And I'm burning through these because there's so much to go through. Letter published in the Evening and Morning Star, which was sometime in February of 1834, sort of an open letter. And this is actually a first of a series directed to priesthood holders. It's a focus on doctrinal themes as a general epistle. So if you were to read in the New Testament, you'd see like the general epistle of John or Peter. They were mimicking that sort of behavior. This particular one is on the atonement of Jesus Christ and about laws and governance. And this is a first where we get published communication instead of handwritten or individual papers. And if you want a current version of this, I would say that this is the Liahona, or what used to be the Ensign. This is just kind of a public, open thing. The first presidency will give a message to the whole church on a monthly basis through this, or whatever they do. It's been done in different ways for different times, but this is the first time we get it, printed form. So if you want to talk about if you want to go back a ways to like the first presidency message, this is, in a sense, kind of where some of that came from. It was kind of interesting. So that's the letter in the Evening and Morning Star. We then get a letter to J.G. Fosdick on the 3rd of February, 1834. So this is found in Oliver Cowdery's letter book. Now, what's interesting about this letter book is the last scribe of that book was Warren Cowdery, who handed it off to his son Curtis, so Curtis Cowdery, who sold it in 1931 to the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, which, by the way, is a gorgeous place. Anyway, found some pictures about this place. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. So this is the Huntington Library in San Marino. Now, his name could have been Jabez G. Fosdick. We're not exactly sure, but it could have been that. Jabez is his first name. This letter is about somebody by the name of Joseph Wood, who's accused of misconduct while he was on his mission in Michigan Territory. Like he committed adultery while it was on his mission. Yikes. So the historical introduction ends in this way to sort of summarize this. It says, in his 10th of January, 1834 letter, Fosdick evidently inquired about church governance and the extent of authority held by high priests in the branches of the church. Joseph Smith's response to the letter featured here emphasized the authority of local branches over that of individual high priests in disciplinary proceedings, and was intended to be a precursor to a fuller treatment on authority to be published later. And that's kind of the way we do it today. Local congregations have the right to take people to church court, basically, is what this is. After that, we get a meeting in February, a couple of days later. This is some minutes from the 9th of February, 1834 meeting. The historical introduction gives us this. This conference, chronicled in these minutes, was evidently called to help church leaders in Kirtland, Ohio, including Joseph Smith, better understand the situation of the branch of the church in New Portage, Medina County, Ohio, and to provide instructions to members living there. So there were some updates counteracting preaching against the church by Ezra Booth. This is somebody who sort of left the church and preached against it. Once that was settled, the branch continued to grow. So sort of once they clarified everything that Ezra Booth was talking about, apparently they continued to grow. And they were instructed to build a meeting house, although they never did. They never actually got around to that. So, that meeting up there, they were hoping to sort of expand themselves, but it never fully came to pass, unfortunately. We had another meeting on the 12th of February. The historical introduction to that meeting gives us this. At this 12th of February meeting, Joseph Smith also recounted some of the conditions and difficulties, including persecution and his own transgressions, he faced at the time he obtained and translated the Book of Mormon. The council then judged two cases. One case involved Martin Harris, who was charged with telling Alpheus C. Russell, quote, that Joseph drank too much liquor when he was translating the Book of Mormon, unquote, and that Joseph Smith, quote, wrestled with many men and threw them. Harris was also charged with saying that he knew the contents of the Book of Mormon before it was translated, whereas Joseph Smith did not. Harris's conversation with Russell, who lived in Kirtland, probably took place after the 23rd of March, 1833, as Harris had not returned to Kirtland from a proselyting mission by that date. So, I guess there were some people saying, yeah, Joseph was drunk, and he also wrestled a lot of people. And before that, it was interesting. Joseph sort of gave the Joseph Smith history where he said, maybe I was guilty of levity and I did some things I wasn't too proud of when I was a kid after receiving the first vision before the Book of Mormon. He goes through all that. But I thought it was interesting. Like, he drank too much and he wrestles a lot of people. I guess that was a problem. Then we get this from the same meeting. Leonard Rich was charged with violating the word of wisdom, although we're not sure how or what really came of that. And also for selling publications of the church at too high a price. So when, I don't know, maybe you're supposed to sell it for 25 cents and he's selling it for $1. And this actually led to some anti-Mormon sentiment being fueled because they're like, yeah, see that? They're just trying to make money off of people. So anyway, that was the end of that meeting. We get a letter here from a man by the name of Joseph Bosworth. And I'll kind of let the historical take over on this one, this historical introduction. In this letter, Joseph Bosworth recounted 2 visions he experienced the night of the 16th of February, 1834, 1 week after meeting with Joseph Smith and others at a conference in New Portage, Medina County, Ohio. So 2 visions coming right up. I'm going to summarize this a little bit, but this is from I'll just kind of read it off to you. It's very interesting. Bosworth's belief in the reality of visions, as opposed to Campbell's disregard for such experiences in modern times, may have influenced his decision to join the Church of Christ. Bosworth's probable familiarity with at least some of Joseph Smith's visionary experiences, including his and Rigdon's vision, section 76, published in the July 1832 issue of the Evening and Morning Star, may have contributed to his desire to share his own visions with church leaders in Kirtland, Ohio. No response to Bosworth's letter has been located. So here are your visions. I'm just going to read through them. I'll skip through a few things here. He gets a little flowery in his language, but let's read them out. Says he, first vision. I saw a strange appearance in the sky in the east, next a body of light rising up in the same place. While this luminary was rising, which was not brighter than the sun, I saw another most grand fountain of light, more majestic than anything that ever I saw, of great magnitude, and the light that flowed from it is indescribable. When or whether all these lights disappeared in my vision, I am not able to tell, as my eyes were taken off to view another sight, which then presented itself to my view. I now saw 2 armies, one from the north and the other from the south, paraded in 2 straight lines facing each other, near together, extending from east to west, as I thought, through the whole earth, all mounted on horses, equipped with arms of warfare in the highest pomp, all standing still prepared for a most tremendous battle. I saw no fighting, except one exchange of shots by a few men, very far in the west. So far I could not hear the report of guns, but saw the motion and the smoke of burning powder. I stood on the ground with some of my brethren. Here this great light shone so bright, not armored ourselves in this battle, nor was I the least intimidated. Brother Thomas Gordon stood by and said, Brother Joseph, I am not afraid, on which I asked him if he saw the smoke in the west. Thus the scene closed. So 2 armies, a north and a south, paraded as far as the eye can see, getting ready for battle, and the smoke rising in the west. Interesting vision. Vision second. First, I saw myself in various parts and in different congregations of men and women, many of which I knew, laboring with great diligence in the word of God and proclaiming the things which I had seen in a vision of the 2 lights and the great armies of horsemen. So earnest and said thing I remember now and ever shall, while a white spittle flew out of many of their mouths, the mysteries of the gospel, the mysteries of godliness, and the mysteries of eternity seemed to be understood instantaneously. And many of our brethren were there who now live in Kirtland, and many of whom I have seen and know them. Glory be to God on high. And here is the great scene, my brethren, in the full interpretation was understood of all, that God had shown me in my vision, and even I felt myself clothed with the knowledge of God. The church never responded to that officially, but that was a letter sent to Joseph Smith. A vision of a North and a South army going at it with each other. I thought that was interesting. All right, moving on to section 102. Here we go. So these are what are called revised minutes from Minute Book 1. So, blame not me for having you go through minutes of meetings, because one of them is actually published in section 102 as minutes. So if you look at it in your modern scriptures, you're going to see clerks at the end, and this is what it is. So why this? Well, it's in the handwriting of Orson Hyde, and there's some corrections in the text. For example, on page 2, we get one removal and another replaces the text with shall more than 6, referring to a church court. So meaning you have to have at least 6 people involved in a church court. That was clarified, and that's important in our lesson today. Otherwise, it's a very clean copy. So we also get a copy in Revelation Book 2, which is also the handwriting of Orson Hyde. And it's kind of towards the back of the book, so it's a bit out of order for this. But then we get the handwriting of Joseph Smith, which says, to go into the covenants. So why do we have meeting minutes in the Doctrine and Covenants? Because Brother Joseph said so. So take that. We also get a copy in something called the Hyde and Pratt Notebook. This is the handwriting of Orson Hyde. He's copying the junk out of this thing. And basically, he kind of kept his own copy in this notebook. This is section 5 in the original Doctrine and Covenants, so very much towards the front, very much part of like how to manage and regulate the church. And we also get a copy in the manuscript history. So an introduction, if you don't mind. So the minute book says this for this introduction. The above items have been corrected according to the resolution passed in the same, and the following is the correction. Kirtland, February 17, 1834. So that's what you're reading. Revelation Book 2 and the Hyde Notebook just give the date. Doctrine and Covenants gives us minutes of the organization of the High Council of the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints. Hang on to that thought. Kirtland, February 17, 1834. We don't get a name for the church until 1838, so the fact that they're already calling themselves Latter-day Saints is interesting later in this episode, so stay tuned. The manuscript history also gives us the same thing that's in the Doctrine and Covenants. Okay. We get some changes in the modern section headings. Both of them gives us dates, places, and says that Oliver Cowdery and Orson Hyde scribed this. We are now in History of the Church, Volume 2, by the way. So this is the first edition, the first revelation that we get that traditionally was used from the history of the church. So we have now switched over. So everything up to this point has all been contained in Volume 1 of the History of the Church. So the 1981 version of this says, 2 days later, the minutes were corrected by the prophet, read to the High Council, and accepted by the council. Verses 30 through 32, having to do with the Council of the 12 Apostles, were added by the prophet Joseph Smith in 1835 when he prepared this section for publication in the Doctrine and Covenants. The 2013 version of this is changed. It says the prophet revised the minutes the following day, and the next day the corrected minutes were unanimously accepted by the High Council as a, quote, form and constitution of the High Council of the Church. Verses 30 through 32, having to do with the Council of the 12 Apostles, were added in 1835 under Joseph Smith's direction when this section was prepared for publication in the Doctrine and Covenants. So the reason why we have minutes of a meeting is because this is how we run high councils from now on. Now, you have a high council over the whole church. That is the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, I believe. But then every stake in the church also has a high council, which I believe usually is composed of 12 people, 12 men, priesthood holders, high priests. So I don't know for sure, but this is basically how to do that job. This is how you do it right. The historical introduction gives us a little more. It says, on the 17th of February, 1834, at a meeting that included priesthood holders and other members of the church, Joseph Smith oversaw the initial organization of a standing, quote, President's Church Council in Kirtland, Ohio. Orson Hyde, the clerk of the meeting, noted in the minutes that that many questions have been asked during the time of the organization of this council, and doubtless some errors have been committed. It was therefore voted by all present that Brother Joseph should make all necessary corrections by the spirit of inspiration hereafter. Joseph Smith worked on amending the minutes the following day, quote, with all the strength and wisdom that he had, unquote, and presented the revised minutes featured here to a council of 62 priesthood holders and church members on the 19th of February. Joseph Smith's revisions were significant and both added and deleted material from the original minutes. After hearing the revised minutes read 3 times and making at least one correction, the council unanimously voted to accept the revised minutes as a, quote, form and constitution of the High Council of the Church of Christ hereafter, unquote, with the proviso that if the president should hereafter discover any lack in the same, he should be privileged to fill it up. At the 19th February meeting, after giving several blessings and items of instruction to members of the new council, Joseph Smith reported that, quote, the council was organized according to the ancient order, and also according to the mind of the Lord, unquote. Conducting itself according to procedures outlined in the minutes featured here, the council, later known as the Kirtland High Council, then heard its first case. So, further into this, we get these minutes also authorized high priests at remote locations to, when necessary, organize similar temporary disciplinary councils, the decisions of which could be appealed to the standing high council at the seat of the general government of the church, then in Kirtland, now in Salt Lake City. So this means that councils and standing councils can conduct church business in any area that they exist in, which is very much how the church works today. There are traveling general authorities that go and sort of make sure everything is in order, but for the most part, it is sort of upon the leaders of the church in that area to take care of things for themselves. They also started doing this same kind of thing in Illinois, in Iowa, and eventually in Nauvoo. So there you go with the High Council. So some content and footnotes from this. The minutes state this. This High Council was appointed by revelation for the purpose of settling important difficulties which may or might arise in the church, which cannot or could not be settled by the church or the bishop's council to the satisfaction of the parties. Footnote 2 for this says, at the 19th of February meeting in which these revised minutes were accepted, Joseph Smith blessed the members of the High Council with, quote, wisdom and power to counsel in righteousness upon all subjects that might be laid before them, suggesting that Joseph Smith understood that the council's responsibilities would include more than overseeing church discipline. And so it is to this day. The minutes also give us, whenever this council convenes to act upon any case in the church, the 12 counselors shall consider whether it is a difficult one or not. If it is not, 2 only of the counselors shall speak upon it according to the form above written. But if it is thought to be more or a difficult one, 4 shall be appointed, and if still more difficult, 6. But in no case, not over that number shall be more than 6 be, that's the addition, be appointed to speak. The accused in all cases has the right to 1/2 of the council to prevent insult or injustice. So how does this work? It says here, these counselors who draw even numbers, that is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12, are the individuals who are to stand up in behalf of the accused and prevent insult or injustice. And in all cases, the accuser and the accused shall have a privilege of speaking for themselves before the council after the evidences are heard probably, and the counselors who are appointed to speak in the case have finished their remarks. So after the evidences are heard, the counselors, accuser, and the accused have spoken. The president shall give a decision according to the understanding which he shall have of the case, and call upon the 12 counselors to sanction the same by their voices. So it's a very interesting thing. You get 12 in the room, and they draw straws, basically. They just randomly draw numbers. And whoever are the even ones have to protect and sort of stand up for the accused, and everybody else doesn't. So I love how random that is. I love that it's like, yeah, you're all here, but it's random. And you have to fight for this guy. I think that's very interesting, how to run a railroad. Further into this, we get, the high priests, when abroad, have power to call and organize a council after the manner of the foregoing, to settle difficulties when the parties, or either of them, shall request it. And the said council of high priests shall have power to appoint one of their own number to preside over such council. And you get to have appeals, too. So this is a whole court system. Should the parties, or either of them, be dissatisfied with the decision of said council, they may appeal to the High Council at the seat of the general government of the church and have a rehearing, which case shall there be conducted according to the former pattern written, as though no such decision had been passed or made. And then they list off the original group, what they drew, and close the meeting before starting their first hearing. So they cast lots, they drew even numbers, odd numbers, that's all listed in the Revelation. And then they went to town. So there you go. That is our first part for the day. You get all the way to a high council, a couple of cases heard, and some very interesting visions from a kind of just member of the church who used to be one of the Campbellites. So staying tuned with us. After this, we're going to be getting into 3 meetings and a revelation, basically. Kind of simple. We'll see you then. All right, here's part 2. We're going to go through 3 meetings and a revelation. So the first one that we get is on the 9th of February, 1834. This is the first meeting after those revised minutes. So we get section 102, and then away we go doing stuff. The historical introduction for this meeting is included in the meeting in the minutes presented here is the council's discussion and acceptance of the corrected 17 February minutes, as well as Joseph Smith's declaration that the High Council was, quote, organized according to the ancient order and also according to the mind of the Lord. The newly organized High Council then heard its first case, which concerned charges against Curtis Hodges Sr. for, quote, loud speaking and a want of clearness in articulation at various meetings. Several witnesses supported the charges, though no extant contemporary record identifies the precise circumstances, locations, or dates of Hodges' offenses. So, be careful about talking real loud and being clear in your articulation, because you'll get taken to court, apparently. I guess is what that means. Anyway, we also get some blessings from the meeting, and this is why I wanted to get into this, which I think is interesting. After much good instruction, Joseph the president laid his hands upon the heads of the 2 assistant presidents and pronounced a blessing upon them, that they might have wisdom to magnify their office and power over all the power of the adversary. He also laid his hands upon the 12 counselors and commanded a blessing to rest upon them, that they might have wisdom and power to counsel in righteousness upon all subjects that might be laid before them. He also prayed that they might be delivered from those evils to which they were most exposed, and that their lives might be prolonged on the earth. Joseph Smith Sr. then laid his hands upon the head of his son, Joseph, and said, Joseph, I lay my hands upon thy head and pronounce the blessings of all thy progenitors upon thee, that thou mayest hold the keys of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven until the coming of the Lord. Amen. He also laid his hands upon the head of his son Samuel Smith and said, Samuel, I lay my hands upon thy head and pronounce the blessings of thy progenitors upon thee, that thou mayest remain a priest of the Most High God, and like Samuel of old, hear his voice saying, Samuel, Samuel. Amen. A very interesting meeting. I love these. There seems to be such a great amount of love in the Smith family. I just love that. Anyway, meeting the next day that we get. Part of the meeting dealt with the word of wisdom questions brought back from Orson Pratt and Lyman Johnson's mission to Springfield. The historical introduction gives us this. Using the case encountered by Pratt and Johnson in Pennsylvania to start a discussion about the revelation, the High Council decided that transgressing the word of wisdom was grounds for losing one's office in the church. Okay. The council's decision was published in a church newspaper in 1836 and provided church leaders with a policy that was referenced and enforced to one degree or another in the early 1840s in Nauvoo, Illinois. Wow. So a word of wisdom becomes a for real punishment sort of thing. The rest of the meeting dealt with some missionary assignments going to Canada, where Joseph and Sidney had just had a lot of success, and some other missions that were not fulfilled because of the needs of the saints and independents. So instead of going on missions, some of these people joined Zion's camp. The historical introduction gives us a little bit more. It says the 20th of February Council also scheduled a conference at Saco, Maine, on the 13th of June, 1834, quote, in answer to a special request of the church in that place, through the medium of a letter from one of the elders now laboring in that vicinity. So there's that meeting. 4 days later, we get another meeting. Orson Pratt and Lyman White had volunteered to go to Independence to get things squared away and help the saints who were struggling down in Missouri, but they had returned with the report that they had found. So the historical introduction gives us this. The two men also asked how and when church members would return to Jackson County. Joseph Smith then declared his intention to travel to Missouri to assist in redeeming Zion, and between 30 and 40 conference attendees volunteered to go with him. Joseph Smith may have volunteered to go to Missouri because of instructions given in a revelation dictated the same day at this High Council meeting that was held. That revelation specifically designated Joseph Smith as the, quote, servant mentioned in the 16 and 17 December 1833 revelation, who was supposed to raise the group that would redeem Zion. And the last portion of the historical introduction says this: just 2 days later, Joseph Smith and the others designated in the revelation began recruiting additional volunteers to go to Missouri and eventually formed an expedition known as the Camp of Israel of more than 200 individuals who traveled to Clay County, Missouri in the summer of 1834. So this meeting is where Zion's Camp officially starts, or maybe unofficially starts, but that's where it begins. So let's get into section 103, and we're going to get into a lot about Zion's Camp, but this is kind of a big one. There's a lot of surviving copies of this revelation. So the earliest copy that we get from this revelation is the Hyde and Pratt Notebook of Revelations. So this is the handwriting of Orson Pratt. It says so on the very last page. That's how we know. Well, there's also other things that they've done. We still have this in the Church History Library, and it's a really clean copy. So that's the earliest one that we get. We also get a copy in Revelation Book 1. This is the handwriting of John Whitmer. There's a little introduction that's a sort of a superscript from Oliver Cowdery, which says, in the spring of 1834, before Joseph Smith Jr. started to redeem Zion. So we're about to start going and hopefully kicking some butt, right? Revelation Book 2 is in the handwriting of Orson Hyde. We get some corrections in an unknown hand. And we also get these sort of slashed graphite marks across a few pages, which doesn't seem to mean anything as far as we know. So they're very light anyway. So not sure what that was about. We get a copy of this in W. W. Phelps' diary. Another copy is called William W. Phelps's copy, and that's in his own hand as well. Wilford Woodruff has a copy in his Book of Revelations. Get that. Willard Richards has a pocket companion copy. We also get one found in the Newell K. Whitney Papers. Haven't Forgotten About You, that BYU collection. We get a copy there. We also get one in the Book of the Law of the Lord, and this is the handwriting of Robert B. Thompson. That's a really nice copy. One found in Heber C. Kimball's record book, and that's in the handwriting of William Clayton. So it's kind of interesting. It is not found in the original Doctrine and Covenants, but it is found in the manuscript history of the church. So there you go. So some circumstances to section 103. We get a little sec 103 that somebody wrote at the top of the notebook of Revelations. So that's all you get. Revelation Book 1 gives a revelation given at Kirtland, Ohio. There you go. We also get Oliver Cowdery's edition as that introduction, as we've already talked about. Revelation Book 2 adds a flourish and a date, which is Kirtland, February 1834. The rest of the copies give you the revelation at Kirtland or at a date. Basically, it's all the same as above. The manuscript history gives a document of a woman by the name of Abigail Leonard being deposed about violence. So being deposed or having a deposition is sort of an official statement about the facts of the case. In this case, it's about the violence against the people in Missouri. And then we get the following. It says, I received the following, revelation given February 24th, 1834. We get no change to the modern section headings, but we get some good data from the historical introduction by the Joseph Smith Papers editors, and it says this. The same day that this revelation was dictated, Parley P. Pratt and Lyman White, who had traveled from Missouri to Kirtland, Ohio, reported to the Kirtland High Council on the condition of the Missouri members, most of whom had taken refuge in Clay County. Pratt and White also asked the High Council, quote, how and by what means Zion was to be redeemed from our enemies, unquote. Joseph Smith then volunteered to lead an expedition to Missouri to assist Zion's redemption, and 30 or 40 others stated that they would go with him. Before adjourning, the council appointed Joseph Smith as, quote, commander-in-chief of the armies of Israel and the leader of those who volunteered to go, unquote. So what came first in all of this stuff, right? So it is difficult to determine whether the revelation motivated the decisions of Joseph Smith and others in the High Council, or whether those decisions were affirmed by the Revelation's dictation. Regardless, the Revelation addressed many of the issues discussed in the High Council meeting. Historical introduction also gives us Joseph Smith and others quickly acted on the Revelation's directions. Just 2 days later, he and Parley P. Pratt, quote, started from home to obtain volunteers for Zion, unquote. And Orson Pratt and Orson Hyde did the same. Lyman White and Sidney Rigdon, also appointed in the Revelation as recruiters, apparently left Kirtland on the 28th of February. It is not clear when Hiram Smith and Frederick G. Williams and the other pair assigned in the Revelation to recruit members for the expedition departed, but John Murdoch reported that Hiram Smith was at Edmund Bosley's home in Livonia, New York, on the 15th of March, 1834. For the next several weeks, these 8 men held meetings in which they preached, recruited volunteers, and raised funds to help restore the refugees to their homes in Jackson County. These activities ultimately resulted in the formation of the Camp of Israel, an expedition of more than 200 individuals that marched to Clay County in the summer of 1834. So some content and footnotes from this, and then we'll close up this part. The Revelation says this: because they did not hearken altogether unto the precepts and commandments which I gave unto them, but verily I say unto you that I have decreed a decree which my people shall realize, inasmuch as they hearken from this hour unto the counsel which I the Lord their God shall give unto them. Behold, they shall, for I have decreed it, begin to prevail against mine enemies from this very hour, and by hearkening to observe all the words which I the Lord their God shall speak unto them, they shall never cease to prevail until the kingdoms of the world are subdued under my feet. So footnote 4 to this says, a December 1833 revelation stated that the Lord had allowed church members to be expelled from Jackson County because, quote, there were jarrings and contentions, envyings and strifes, and lustful and covetous desires among them. It also said that because church members were slow to hearken unto the voice of the Lord their God, God was slow to hearken unto their prayers to answer them in the day of their trouble. So further into the Revelation we get, behold, I say unto you that the redemption of Zion must needs come by power. Therefore I will raise up unto my people a man who shall lead them like as Moses led the children of Israel. For if ye are the children of Israel, and of the seed of Abraham, and you must needs be led out of bondage by power with a stretched out arm. Footnote 13 for this says, earlier revelations also designated Joseph Smith as one like unto Moses. So it's not just this particular revelation, which is kind of a bold thing to say, I might add. Let all the churches send up wise men with their monies and purchase lands, even as I have commanded them. Footnote 18 for this says, acting on the counsel given here, church members in Lewis, New York, and sent John Tippets and Joseph Tippets to Kirtland in November 1834 as wise men appointed by the voice of the church. They came with cash and property totaling nearly $850, quote, for the purpose of purchasing land in Jackson County or counties round about it for the inheritance of the church. Now, I would like that calling. Hey, you're going to be a wise man and go out and do this. Okay, gotcha. Anyway, text further gives us, let no man be afraid to lay down his life for my sake. For whoso layeth down his life for my sake shall find it again, and whoso is not willing to lay down his life for my sake is not my disciple. Now, footnote 21 for this clarifies something. It says, sometime in the fall of 1831, Joseph Smith, as part of his Bible revision project, changed the passage in Mark 8:35 that read, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. 2. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, or whosoever shall save his life shall be willing to lay it down for myself or for my sake. And if he is not willing to lay it down for my sake, he shall lose it. But whosoever shall be willing to lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. That's the change. Revelation also gives us this. It is my will that my servant Sidney Rigdon should lift up his voice in the congregations in the eastern countries in preparing the churches to keep the commandments. Footnote 22 for this says, which basically says, if you can't do service, do support. So it says, in addition to attending the March 1834 church conference in Avon, New York, to recruit volunteers, Rigdon spake at an April 1834 conference in Norton, Ohio, about, quote, the revelation given requiring the saints to go up for the deliverance of those who had been driven from their inheritances, and urged the importance of an obedience to the same by those who could go, and those who could not go should help those who are willing to, should help those who are going to means for their expenses. So, if you can't go, then give us some money. But Joseph gets to go. So it says in the Revelation, therefore, as I send it to you, ask and you shall receive. Pray earnestly that peradventure my servant Joseph may go up with you and preside in the midst of my people and organize my kingdom upon the consecrated land. Footnote 23 for this says, as late as April 1834, Joseph Smith remained concerned that he could not be able to go to Missouri because of pressing debts. And we're going to get a lot into that in this episode. So the Revelation ends with, copied by O. Hyde, 18 of August, 1834. So what's the aftermath of this? This formally called for Zion's camp to be organized. This is sort of a revelation saying, yes, we're doing this. Not just Joseph volunteering, but there's a little bit more official language here. This led to a series of very remarkable stories, and a few men did not return due to disease, cholera specifically. So no shots were fired, but most of the leaders of the church came from the camp of Israel. And it's shown to be one of the most important events that galvanized and trained these future leaders of the church. So you want to talk about Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor. A lot of these men were involved in Zion's camp. And there was, like I said, there was also a lot of people who died from this. So it was a very major thing. And we're going to get into it now. So parts 3 and 4 of our little episode, we're going to dive a lot into the camp of Israel. And we actually don't have a ton of documentation because they were off doing a camp of Israel. We get a couple of letters, but that's about it. So stick around, and we're going to blow through it here on Filling in History. Okay, moving right along with our next part here, we're going to get some printed licenses. Whoa, now. A meeting, letters, and section 104. So we get this license from Frederick G. Williams. Now, this is a kind of a first for us in this church here, where we have licenses that are actually printed off and filled in as a form. They're not handwritten anymore. So this is sort of the first for this. It's signed by Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. License for Frederick G. Williams. You also get another one for John P. Green. Same form, same signatures. Sidney Rigdon adds his signature to this one as well. But kind of a big moment, a lot more official looking. We then get a letter from W. W. Phelps. This is published in the Evening and Morning Star. And the editorial, if you will, is entitled The Outrage in Jackson County, Missouri. This is an open letter. And there was basically a fear of so, the church has been beat up. They've been driven out of Independence. They're over in Clay County now, but they don't want to go to witness in a courtroom because it would expose them and lead to more violence. That was the fear. So we get this from the historical introduction. On the 5th of February, 1834, Dunklin instructed Captain David R. Atchison, the leader of the Liberty Blues, a volunteer militia unit out of about 50 men, to protect Mormons who would testify at an upcoming grand jury hearing in Independence, presided over by Ryland. Dunklin, governor at the time, also dispatched Robert W. Wells, the state attorney general, to assist Reese at the hearing. On the 24th of February, 1834, the Liberty Blues escorted approximately a dozen Mormon witnesses into Independence. After waiting for 3 hours the following morning, the witnesses were informed by Wells and Reese that the grand jury were composed exclusively of such as had been concerned in the recent outrages, and that consequently it would be useless to prefer bills against such a jury. In other words, the jury was composed of Missourians who had committed the violence against the Mormons, and thus attempting to bring charges at that hearing would prove fruitless. The Missouri Constitution indicated that members of a jury were to be from the same area as the accused. The accused has the right to an impartial jury of the vicinage. This is unclear whether it was possible for Mormons to change the venue of the hearing. Eventually, the witnesses were escorted out of Independence. So basically, they were going to show up in court and be faced with all the people who beat the crap out of them. And they're not going to say like, yeah, you should do this. No, they're going to get away with it. So they escorted them out the building. So that's what they did. Further into this, we get, in the meantime, Violence and malice against Mormons in Jackson County escalated. Several families who had been evicted in November of 1833 returned to their homes in February of 1834. On the 20th of February 1834, a group of Jackson County residents attacked these individuals, threatening them with guns, beating several with whips and sticks, and informing them that they would lose their lives if they did not again abandon their homes. William W. Phelps wrote the letter featured here to inform church leaders in Kirtland of these developments. After Kirtland church leaders received this letter, Oliver Cowdery published it in the March 1834 issue of the Evening and the Morning Star. So this is my house now, and if you come back here to the house that you own with your title, we're going to kill you, is the general sentiment here. And our juries are made up of the people who are making these threats. So not a very positive situation here for them. We do get a letter to the church in March 1834. This is the second letter in the series published in the Evening and Morning Star, which is mostly sort of doctrinal. The historical introduction for this letter says, according to this March epistle, transgression of God's law made it impossible for the transgressor to return to God's presence, except through Jesus Christ, who offered redemption through faith in the efficacy of his sacrifice and through participation in ordinances. The letter also stated that God revealed, quote, the whole plan of the gospel with its ordinances in all ages. Joseph Smith and the Kirtland leaders also exhorted the readers of this letter to improve themselves, especially in the face of growing persecution, and remain obedient to God's law. Joseph Smith and other elders responsible for writing this letter also expounded upon several other themes, including celestial glory and eternal life, the law of sacrifice, and continuing revelation. So that's the second letter in the series of 4. We do get some meeting minutes here from March 17th of 1834. It was held in Avon, New York, as part of the recruitment for Zion's camp. So Avon calling on this one. Yuck, yuck. The historical introduction for this says, the participants of the 17th March conference also discussed raising $2,000 to help church leaders in Kirtland pay off their debts. Although the minutes of the conference do not specify the source of the debts, they may have been related to the purchase of the Peter French farm in Kirtland in 1833, land that was to be the site of the house of the Lord. And it was an unsuccessful attempt. So further down we get, the conference also assigned Hyde to bring the funds to Kirtland. How much effort was devoted to fundraising in accordance with these assignments is not clear, but a 7th of April, 1834 letter from Joseph Smith to Hyde indicated that of the end of March, March 31, the goal of collecting $2,000 had not been met. And I will add, was never met, as we find in history. After this, we get a letter to Edward Partridge on the 30th of March, 1834. This one is another one held by the Huntington Library in San Marino, California. A gorgeous place to lay something to rest, I would add. They're gorgeous over there. Anyway, it is in the handwriting of Thomas Bullock. It is found in Oliver Cowdery's letter book, and the historical introduction to this letter says, from the end of February to the end of March 1834, Joseph Smith traveled to recruit individuals for the Camp of Israel expedition to Missouri. On the 28th of March, he returned to Kirtland, Ohio, and found that he had received several letters from Missouri church leaders, some of which were from members of the United Firm. Those letters, though no longer extant, seem to have discussed, among other things, the business of the firm, including its losses. The letters from Missouri must also have criticized Joseph Smith and other Kirtland church leaders, according to Joseph Smith. The letters contained sharp, piercing, and cutting reproofs, partially because of misspellings and grammatical errors that appeared in a published broadside of a December 1833 revelation, and partially because of the lack of financial support from Kirtland for Missouri church leaders. So you can't spell, you're not doing things right, and you're not giving us money. So pretty harsh. Further into this, we get, after spending the preceding day with his family and in the midst of attending to ecclesiastical affairs, Joseph Smith penned a reply to the Missouri leaders on the 30th of March, 1834. The letter featured here offers a glimpse into how the hardships of late 1833 and 1834 afflicted Joseph Smith and how he handled criticism. This letter exhibited Joseph Smith's frustration over their complaints, but also evinced his desire to forgive past transgressions for the sake of unity. In the letter, Joseph Smith also offered more information on the matters with which Phelps and others had found fault, bemoaned the persecution of the church was experiencing in both Missouri and Kirtland, and reported to the expected expedition of able brethren to Missouri. Specifically, he noted church members' lack of support in terms of both financial donations and individual volunteers for the contemplated expedition to Zion. Joseph Smith also suggested that though he intended to be part of the expedition, he had other matters to resolve before departing. In fact, it was not until the 9th of April, 1834, after the legal proceedings against Dr. Philastus Hurlbut, who had been charged with threatening to kill Joseph Smith, had successfully concluded that Joseph Smith finally determined to go to Zion. So he had a lot of crap that he had to deal with before he could move on. But the funny part is, and the really sad part maybe is, after all this effort, they might have never received it. So from the historical introduction, the letter further provided information on the advantage of employing Missouri Attorney General Robert W. Wells in the Mormons' legal suits on debts and finances in Kirtland, on the recent purchase of a printing press by Oliver Cowdery in New York, and the selling of Jackson County property. Though some leaders in Missouri wrote letters to Kirtland in the months following this letter, they did not specifically address this letter or its contents. Therefore, it is not clear if the men in the United Firm in Missouri received this letter. So, after all that effort, they might not have ever gotten it. All right, now, welcome to Documents Volume 3. We have now made it through, if you are reading along in the Joseph Smith Papers, Volume 1, Volume 2, and now we're going to start into Documents Volume 3, so that means April of 1834. So let's just dive into this. So here's the meetings from the minutes from the meeting in Kirtland. I'll just read these off to you just to kind of give you a sense of where we are. So it says, Kirtland, April 4th, 1834. This evening, a council of high priests assembled at the house of Brother Joseph Smith, Jr.'s to reconsider the case of Brother George F. James, Brother Joseph Smith, Jr. presiding. Brother George then said that he had often promised to take up his cross and magnify his calling, but had failed, and ought to have written to Brother Joseph ere this time and given him the information that his pecuniary affairs called his attention at home, which prevented his fulfilling the promise he had made to Brother Joseph in going out to proclaim the gospel. And he sincerely asked pardon of the Lord and of his brethren, and particularly Brother Joseph. He also said he was willing to ask the forgiveness of this church. He said that relative to certain charges, which were that he had not attended meetings and had treated lightly some of the weak, etc., that he had attended meetings generally, and as for speaking to treating lightly any brethren because of his or her weakness, was foreign from his mind, and was that which he had never done, nor could ever find such principles in his bosom. Brother Joseph said he had no hardness. He only wished Brother George to consider this as a chastisement, and that the council were bound to notice his conduct heretofore, but now, if he, Brother George, was willing to walk according to the new covenant, he should have his hand of fellowship. The council then expressed their satisfaction with Brother George's confession. Oliver Cowdery, Clerk of Council. So, people are failing, and Joseph is being forgiving, which I think is, I think that's just kind of the way that things are going, kind of up against the wall and trying to make things work for the sake of unity. After this meeting, we get a letter to Orson Hyde, and the 7th of April, 1834, and the historical introduction from Documents Volume 3 says, on the 7th of April, 1834, Joseph Smith composed this letter to Orson Hyde, who was on a mission for the church in the eastern United States. Hyde was assigned to recruit members to travel to Missouri to help the saints who had been driven from Jackson County. He also assigned to raise money from church members for land purchases in Missouri and for a payment on the Peter French farm in Kirtland, Ohio. So the conference in Avon showed that things were not really working out, and they didn't come up with the money. So Joseph got the bad news and had a group pair with Whitney in the Whitney store with a few others and responded to the letter. So again, from the historical introduction, Joseph Smith then replied to Hyde's letter, expressing disappointment in the lack of success with fundraising, chastising church members for not contributing their means more liberally, and wondering whether the gathering of saints to Missouri from eastern branches should continue, given church members' apparent lack of generosity. Joseph Smith was especially concerned that he would not be able to go to Missouri to help those saints who had been driven out of Jackson County if monetary help was not forthcoming. He also expressed concerns that if he could not go, the entire expedition would fail to materialize. And it is also not clear if Orson Hyde ever received this letter because we don't have any responses to it. So as they're I'm sharing these because this is all part of Zion's camp. As they're gathering things together, I find it interesting that Joseph's like, maybe we shouldn't do this. If we can't get people to get behind it, maybe we shouldn't do it at all. And I find that very interesting because the stories we abbreviate to say, yeah, we gathered people and went, but there was a lot of this preparation and stress that went along with it. After that, we get an order from Newell K. Whitney. So this is on April 18th, 1834. This is in the handwriting of Newell K. Whitney on a single piece of paper. There's an address on the back, and it reads, "We owe $8,000, which must be paid by the 1st of September next. But if we can get 4 or 5,000 this month, I can pay our debts here and so much of our debts in New York that they will wait until September for the balance. And I also shall be able to purchase some goods this spring for to make my assortment more complete through the summer. At any rate, we must have $4,000 this month. The bearer hereof, Joseph Smith Jr., is authorized by us to borrow from $1,000 to $8,000 and sign a note for the same in the name of N.K. Whitney & Co., which note we will hold ourselves bound to pay. April 18th, Kirtland, April 18th, 1834, N.K. Whitney & Co. Wow. So we've got to pay this debt is basically where they're at. I mean, just they're getting really squeezed here. We have minutes and a discourse from the April 21st, 1834 papers, which we get from the historical introduction. On the 21st of April, 1834, in Norton, Ohio, Joseph Smith presided over a conference of elders that focused on the necessity of redeeming Zion. This conference had a clear millenarian theme, with sermons indicating that Jesus Christ's second coming was near, and that the inhabitants of the earth needed to repent and gather to Zion in order to be saved. Joseph Smith and other participants explained that it was imperative for church members to assist the saints who had been expelled from Jackson County, Missouri, so Zion could be reclaimed and reoccupied. Such assistance could take two forms: volunteering to go with Joseph Smith and others on an expedition to Missouri, or donating money to provision those volunteers. Without such aid, Joseph Smith stated, Zion would not be redeemed, and all of the church would be persecuted and destroyed in like manner. Joseph Smith's journal notes that some few volunteered to go to Zion, and others donated $66.37 for the benefit of the scattered brethren in Zion. So they got something, but not much. For the rest of the conference, we get this. Joseph Smith also spake at the conference about some of the foundational events of the church, topics he rarely discussed in public, including the translation of the Book of Mormon and the revelation of both the priesthood of Aaron, or the lesser priesthood, and the high priesthood. This presentation of these topics largely followed the history he wrote in the summer of 1832. Sidney Rigdon then spoke on the necessity of redeeming Zion, the construction of the house of the Lord in Kirtland, Ohio, and the endowment of power that would come after the house was built. Before the conclusion of the conference, the participants conducted a trial of Thomas Tripp, a church member accused of improprieties with various women. After voting to exclude Tripp from the church, the meeting concluded with the blessing of children by Joseph Smith and the administration of the sacrament. According to Joseph Smith's journal, the conference was, quote, a glorious time. Probably not for Thomas Tripp, but a glorious time. So the blessing of these children, I wanted to read this from the minutes. It says, Brother Joseph then laid hands upon certain children and blessed them in the name of the Lord. The sacrament was then administered by Brother S. Rigdon. So just to kind of say, like, not a whole lot there, but it's interesting that they sort of brought in children to be blessed from Joseph Smith. And it's very simple. Bless them in the name of the Lord. So an interesting meeting. Some good, and then I guess they more or less excommunicated somebody is what I'm reading there. Moving on, though, to section 104, and that'll be the end of this part of the episode. We get the earliest copy is once again another from the Hyde and Pratt Notebook of Revelations. It's in the handwriting of Orson Pratt. It's a very clean copy. And it ends with copied from the original by O. Pratt. We also get a copy in Revelation Book 2. This is the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams, which then changes to the handwriting of Orson Hyde. So toward him at the bottom of page 101, as it is in Revelation Book 2, is when the handwriting changes over. And then all the corrections to the text after that are in Orson Hyde's hands. And these are mostly, grammatical things or just clarifying language. Revelation Book 1 has a copy. It's in the handwriting of John Whitmer. Corrections by William W. Phelps and Joseph Smith. And this is what's really fun about this one. Most of the corrections, most of the additional languages here, are numbers. These numbers were written by the hand of Joseph Smith and probably indicated where to insert code words in the publication of the Doctrine and Covenants. So once again, Enoch is Joseph Smith, Shaniha, I believe, is Kirtland, and so forth. Those code words for places and people. So those were all done by the hand of Joseph Smith. This is section 98 in the original Doctrine and Covenants, and we also get a copy in the manuscript History of the Church. So introductions to it, we get Sec 104 written in somebody else's hand at the top of the earliest copy, along with April 23rd, 1834. That's all the introduction that you get. Revelation Book 2 says, Revelation given April 23rd, 1834, appointing to each member of the united firm their stewardship. Revelation Book 1 gives us the fancy revelation and a place date, just like you do. And the Doctrine and Covenants from 1835 says, Revelation given to Enoch concerning the order of the church for the benefit of the poor. And the manuscript history says, April 22nd, I returned to Kirtland, 23rd, assembled in council with Elders Sidney Rigdon, Frederick F.G. Williams, N.K. Whitney, John Johnson, and O. Cowdery, and united in asking the Lord to give Elder Zebedee Coltrane influence over Brother Jacob Myers, and to obtain the money which he has gone to borrow for us, or cause him to come to this place, and bring it himself. I also received the following, revelation given to Enoch concerning the order of the church for the benefit of the poor, April 23rd, 1834. We get some changes to the modern section headings of this. So the 1981 version of this says, revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet, April 23rd, 1834, concerning the united order, or the order of the church for the benefit of the poor. History of the Church, Volume 2, by the way. Pages 54 through 60. Now, the occasion was that of a council meeting of the First Presidency and other high priests, in which the pressing temporal needs of the people had been given consideration. The United Order at Kirtland was to be temporarily dissolved and reorganized, and the properties as stewardships were to be divided among members of the order. The current section heading from 2013 on says, revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet at or near Kirtland, Ohio, April 23rd, 1834. Concerning the united firm, see the headings to sections 78 and 82. The occasion was likely that of a council meeting of members of the united firm which discussed the pressing temporal needs of the church. An earlier meeting of the firm on April 10th had resolved that the organization be dissolved. This revelation directs that the firm instead be reorganized. Its properties were to be divided among members of the firm as their stewardships. Under Joseph Smith's direction, the phrase united firm was later replaced with united order in the revelation. Those are those little code word changes that we're talking about. So those numbers that he put down. So I will say before we get too far further into this, so there's a lot of talk in modern church theology about how we can't live the law of consecration and it fell apart. I believe that what they're talking about is this moment when they say, hey, we're going to dissolve it, but reorganize it. And as you will shortly see, that was never really done. So what is done here more or less comes to an end here. So from the historical introduction, we get this. This 23rd of April, 1834 revelation contains instructions for the reorganization of the united firm, which was formed in April of 1832 to manage the church's mercantile and publishing endeavors, and had served as an important administrative structure since that time. The firm consisted of three components. The first was N.K. Whitney & Co., a company originally formed in 1826 by Newell K. Whitney and Sidney Gilbert in Kirtland, Ohio. It functioned as the firm's mercantile branch in Kirtland. The second was Gilbert Whitney & Co., a company formed by Gilbert and Whitney after Gilbert moved to Missouri in early 1832. It served as the firm's mercantile branch in Missouri and operated Gilbert's store in Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. Third component was the literary firm, an organization of 6 men who managed church publications. The literary firm supervised W. W. Phelps & Co., the organization responsible for the church's printing operations in Missouri, and F. G. Williams & Co., the company in charge of the church's printing efforts in Kirtland. So that's what it is. Those are the 3 companies that are more or less going to be dissolved. Debts were mounting for the press at Independence, which was now destroyed. So even though the press was destroyed, they couldn't make any money off of it, but they had still gotten into debt to buy that press. So that was a major setback for them. And people were not participating like they should. They started calling things theirs and so forth, and sort of dissolved the spirit of what consecration should be. It wasn't ours or the church's or whatever. It's like, this is mine. Don't touch it. It's mine, right? So that was, I think what they mean by the covetous spirit is like, that belongs to me and I want yours too, sort of thing. So Joseph Smith was also putting together the Camp of Israel at the same time, and he didn't really know if he could do that with all the financial burdens that he was under. So I have to pay my debts. I can't really be leaving right now. What if they come after us or throw us in jail? So there was a lot going on. So the historical introduction continues after all this. Facing such problems, members of the Kirtland branch of the United Firm met on the 10th of April, 1834, and decided, quote, that the firm should be dissolved, and each one receive a stewardship or property to manage. This 23rd of April revelation provided firm members in Kirtland with these stewardships and declared that all things were God's and that the members of the firm needed to manage their stewardships wisely. Despite the earlier decision to dissolve the firm, the revelation directed that it instead be reorganized and that the Missouri and Ohio branches be separated. The revelation called for the establishment of 2 treasuries in Ohio. One treasury was to house sacred things that were to be published and the avails or profits from the sale of those publications. Members of the firm were to deposit money gained from the management of their individual stewardships into a second treasury and then draw on these funds to carry out their stewardships. In addition, the revelation authorized members of the firm this once to use their stewardships as collateral for obtaining loans to pay their existing creditors. So everything's getting divided up. And most of what this section is, and I'm going to skip a lot of that, is to say, hey, Frederick G. Williams, this is your stewardship, and, it's going to be given to you as your inheritance and so forth. Do wisely with it. And then there was going to be treasuries set up, and there was going to be all that. And as we will shortly see, none of it happened. It all just kind of went away after this day. So a pretty major moment. So let's get into some content and footnotes. Most of the section footnotes are just scriptures, so we'll skip those. But the revelation does give us a little bit further in. Therefore, if any man shall take of the abundance which I have made, and impart not his portion according to the law of my gospel unto the poor and the needy, he shall with devices lift up his eyes in hell, being in torment. What does that mean? Footnote 6 for this says, a February 1831 revelation giving the laws of the Church of Christ instructed church members to consecrate their property, part of which would be used for the benefit of the poor. Okay, we get that. Footnote 7 for this says, dives, or dives, I guess, is a Latin word for rich man that was used at times as the name of the rich man in the parable Jesus gave in Luke 16:19 through 31. When this revelation was published in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, dives, or dives, was changed to, quote, the wicked. So you're not going to see this. But apparently there's the rich man and Lazarus. And what I was always taught about that little story is like Lazarus is this disgusting, like the dogs are licking his wounds. He's just poor. But he gets a name. He gets Lazarus, and he is taken up into Abraham's bosom, right? The rich man looks up in torment and is just looking for a drop of water, and he doesn't get a name. But apparently, Dives, or Dives, D-I-V-E-S, is a name that was given to him, I guess, traditionally. So, kind of an interesting thing. Further into the text, we get Sidney have appointed unto him the place where he now resides, and the lot of the tannery for his stewardship, for his support while he is laboring in my vineyard. Footnote 9 for this says, Rigdon had worked as a journeyman tanner in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before coming to Ohio in 1826. The tannery described here, located east of the Whitney store, was owned by Arnold Mason and not deeded to Rigdon until May 3rd of 1834. On the 2nd of April, 1833, a council of high priests instructed Ezra Thayer to purchase the tannery. Although no records detailing any discussions between Thayer and Mason have been located, the two may have worked out the terms of the agreement in the time between that council and this revelation, because the revelation speaks about the tannery as if it were already owned by the united firm. And just to say, some people were basically deeded a business to say, hey, generate cash flows for yourself so you can keep going and do the ministry. And I think that's very interesting. But Rigdon was a tanner. So there you go. Further into the revelation we get, and let my servant Martin devote his monies for the printing of my word, according as my servant Joseph shall direct. Footnote 11 says, Harris had earlier sold his farm in New York to fund the printing of the Book of Mormon, which we have talked about in length. He was then told in an August 1831 revelation to be an example to the church by consecrating his money. According to his son, Harris gave $1,200 to the church thereafter, which Edward Partridge apparently used for land purchases in Jackson County, Missouri. On the 1st of May, 1834, Harris donated $100 to F.G. Williams & Co. for the printing office. And if you don't know, F.G. Williams & Co. is the name of the printing that did the original Doctrine and Covenants. So there you go. The text also says, also the lot upon which his father resides, and let my servant Frederick and Oliver have the printing office, and all things that pertain unto it, and this shall be their stewardship, which shall be appointed unto them. And inasmuch as they are faithful, behold, I will bless them, and multiply blessings upon them. Footnote 15 for this says, on September 11th, 1833, officers of the United Firm organized F.G. Williams & Co. as the firm that would oversee church publications in Kirtland, including church newspapers edited by Oliver Cowdery. In April 1834, the printing office was housed in the brick tavern purchased as part of the Peter French farm, but another structure was under construction west of the house of the Lord to contain both the School of the Prophets and the printing office. Further into this we get, and it is my will that he should sell the lots that are laid off for the building up of the city of my saints, inasmuch as it shall be made known to him by the voice of the Spirit, and according to the counsel of the firm, and by the voice of the firm. Footnote 17 says, Johnson deeded the lot for the house of the Lord to Joseph Smith on May 5th, 1834, and also sold lots to Oliver Cowdery on May 5th of 1834. The Kirtland plat prepared by church leaders in 1833 indicates that other lots were assigned or sold at some point to Johnson's son Luke and Joseph Smith's brother Hiram Smith, among others. And I was showing that to you earlier, like when you take a look at those three little buildings, there were these lots next door to them with their names on it. That's what they were assigned to have. More from this text we get, and again, let my servant Newell have appointed unto him the houses and lot where he now resides, and the lot and building on which the store stands, and the lot also which is on the corner south of the store, and also the lot on which the ashery is situated. And all this I have appointed unto my servant Newell for his stewardship, for a blessing upon him and his seed after him. Footnote 19 says, Newell K. Whitney constructed 2 houses on a 1-acre lot purchased from Peter French on the northwest corner of the intersection of Chardon and Chillicothe streets, or roads, in Kirtland. The first house, called the Red Store, was constructed around 1822, and the second house, where Whitney's family resided in 1834, was built around 1824 behind the Red Store. And what did Joseph get? What did Joseph Smith get? Well, the Revelation says this. And again, let my servant Joseph have appointed unto him the lot which is laid off for the building of my houses, which is 40 rods long and 12 wide, and also the farm upon which his father now resides. And this is the beginning of the stewardship which I have appointed unto him for a blessing upon him and upon his father. Footnote 24 says, the church planned to construct 3 buildings, the house of the Lord, a printing office, and an office building for the church's presidency, on a lot combining some of the land purchased from Peter French and some of the land Frederick G. Williams consecrated to the church after joining the United Firm in March of 1833. And Joseph Sr. was living on that lot at the time. If you remember, he was sort of basically like not really having any place to stay, stayed there and did work around the property. Revelation gives us this, and your brethren, after they are organized, shall be called the united firm of the city of Zion, and they shall be organized in their own names and in their own name. And they shall do their business in their own name and in their own names, and you shall do your business in your own name and in your own names. So footnote 27 says, no evidence has been located to indicate that the united firm in either Missouri or Ohio was ever organized in this way, but the individual members of the firm did conduct business in their own names hereafter. Okay, now, blah, blah, blah. All of that being said, this gets down to an enormously important feature of church theology in terms of like this world's goods and the things that we've been given or the callings that we get. We call them stewardships. This is a huge thing even to this day and really dictates a lot of how we operate in the church. So the Revelation says, but verily I say unto you, I have appointed unto you to be stewards over mine house, even stewards. So for the printing of the Revelations, we get, therefore, a commandment I give unto you that you shall take the books of Mormon and also the copyright which shall be secured of the articles and covenants, in which covenants all my commandments, which it is my will should be printed, shall be printed, and it shall be made known unto you. So footnote 28 for this says, in fall of 1831, the decision was made to publish Joseph Smith's Revelations as the Book of Commandments, a project William W. Phelps worked on in Missouri. After the destruction of the Missouri printing office in July of 1833, Oliver Cowdery purchased a new press in the Kirtland printing establishment. By January of 1834, plans were in place to publish the Scriptures, or Joseph Smith's Bible revision in Kirtland. So all of that, and I think we've said this before, even the Evening and Morning Star, the Doctrine and Covenants, all of that came into this new printing press that they were stewards over. And so nobody really owns stuff. And that's kind of the way the Latter-day Saints think of things today. Like, you may have a house, you may have children, and you are to be a good steward. They're not just yours. They are given to you by the Lord. This is kind of the theological idea that we get from this. We get a lot of talk about our treasury. It says, the sacred treasury of the Lord, and a seal shall be kept upon it, that it may be holy and consecrated unto the Lord. Footnote 31 says, no record of the establishment of the treasury at this time has been located. And there's another treasury that's talked about elsewhere. Footnote 32 says, the record of the establishment of this second treasury, or the appointment of a treasurer at this time, has been located. So it never happened. The Revelation finally dictates to us, this is kind of the last thing that we get, behold, I will soften the hearts of those to whom you are in debt, until I shall send means unto you for your deliverance. Therefore, write speedily unto New York, and write according to that which shall be dictated by my Spirit. And I will soften the hearts of those to whom you are in debt, that it shall be taken away out of their minds and bring affliction upon you. And inasmuch as ye are humble and faithful and call on my name, behold, I will give you the victory. Footnote 33 for this says, Whitney's 1834 New York account book shows that he made several payments on the New York debts in June and July of 1834. However, the payments totaled only $685, and a considerable amount of money was still owed. So for all intents, I would say, if you want to be binary, every effort that you just heard about failed. So this episode is a lot about a whole lot of planning and a whole lot of work, and they just couldn't come up with it. And that's tough. And this is a really trying time, as you will see. And I want to really lean into that, because in our next part, when we start talking about Zion's camp, you're going to see some major tempers flare up and some pretty incredible stories from that. I think it makes sense. I mean, these people are just having one thing after another that they're planning for and working for just fall on its face or come up with something meager. So it's a frustrating time. And, there's a lot of things where things work out, but that's just the situation that they're in right now. So what's the aftermath of this whole thing? Well, the historical introduction kind of ends this way. It says, 5 days after this revelation, another revelation provided more instructions for the division and settlement of the united firm, and declared the Kirtland branch of the firm free from the firm in Zion. However, there is no evidence that firm members followed the instructions to establish treasuries and mortgage their stewardships. Instead, it appears that after an initial period in which members of the firm executed deeds for the stewardships, no other action was taken. So they got their stuff, and that's as far as it went. It may be that the expedition to Missouri, which resulted in Joseph Smith's absence from Kirtland from early May to late July 1834, distracted church leaders from implementing the instructions immediately. Alternatively, leaders may have decided to transfer much of the responsibility for the church's temporal endeavors to other administrative bodies, such as the Kirtland High Council. Whatever the case, the United Firm effectively ceased to exist soon after this revelation was dictated. So that's as far as we go and no further for the United Order and for this traditional form of the law of consecration. Now, I would argue a lot of Latter-day Saints kind of say like, we just don't do consecration anymore. Not so. We're not doing United Firm stuff or doing deeds and stewardships and, consecrations, yes, but inheritances. That form of things is no longer the case and ends here. But I hope it maybe gives a little context of why it fell apart. It wasn't just because people are bad. There was a lot of things going on that caused this to dissolve, and they counseled together and came up with that as the best answer to the problem. So that's it for part 3. In part 4, we're going to be talking about Zelph. We're going to be talking about the actual Zion's camp and a few letters to Emma Smith, and we're going to cap it all off with section 103 of the Doctrine and Covenants, so stay with us. Okay, our final part for this episode, we're going to get a couple of letters to Emma. We're going to talk about Zelph. We're going to talk about Zion's camp a lot, and we're going to end it all off with section 105. So the first thing that we get is going to be a sheet of paper. This is the balance of account by Newell K. Whitney. It shows all the debts held by the United Firm members, and if you'd like to know at this time, the total comes out to $3,653.35. And as you can see, it's sort of laid out by who owes what. But these are all the people that are involved in the United Firm, and this is the debt that they had. We get an unpublished revelation here, kids. So I'm just going to light right into it. We read unpublished revelations here, and it states, Kirtland, 28 April 1834. Verily thus saith the Lord concerning the division and settlement of the United Firm, let there be reserved $3,000 for the right and claim of the firm in Kirtland for inheritance in due time, even when the Lord will, and with this claim to be had in remembrance when the Lord shall reveal it for a right of inheritance. Ye are made free from the firm of Zion, and the firm of Zion is made free from the firm of Kirtland. Thus saith the Lord. Amen. Copied from the original by Orson Hyde. Unquote. So we are no longer connected. The earliest copy that we get for this is in the Hyde and Pratt notebook, handwriting of Orson Hyde here. It is in Revelation Book 2, also a handwriting of Orson Hyde, and it is in Revelation Book 1, which John Whitmer writes down, and it is never published anywhere else. So a little context for this, just to be completely clear, the historical introduction gives us this. Given the indebtedness of the firm's members, the intended source of the $3,000 is unclear. It may have come through donations or through assuming more debt. In March of 1834, Joseph Smith directed members in New York to try to raise $2,000, quote, for the relief of the brethren in Kirtland, unquote. Although a 31st of March 1834 letter from Orson Hyde indicated that these efforts had not yet been successful, firm members may have held out hope that funds from New York would still be forthcoming. On the 18th of April, firm member Newell K. Whitney provided Joseph Smith with authorization to obtain a loan between $1,000 and $8,000 in the name of N.K. Whitney & Co. It is possible that the $3,000 was to come from such a loan. And further to this, it may also be that the $3,000 was not necessary money the firm expected to have immediately, but that it was a sum they planned on obtaining in the future. The intended use of the $3,000 is also unclear. The revelation instructs that the money be spent for a right and a claim on inheritances, presumably land, but it is unclear whether that meant land in Missouri. The place designated as the location of the saints' inheritances, or the land in Ohio. The revelation likewise does not specify when the inheritances should be obtained. Deeds to many of the stewardships assigned to firm members were provided on the 30th of April and the 5th of May, 1834, but the revelation seems to imply that the inheritance would be given at a more distant time. So, there's an unpublished revelation for you. After this, we get a letter to the church, April of 1834, published in the Evening and Morning Star. Open letter, and it is part of the 4 intended letters about doctrinal issues. So, the theme of this one, of number 3 here, is escaping the corruption of the world. And the historical introduction from volume 3 says, the final installment, reproduced here, describes the danger of apostasy facing the saints and the tendency of those who reject the faith to become active opponents. The focus on apostasy and false doctrine may have been prompted by the activities of Dr. Philastus Hurlbut, who was excommunicated from the church in June of 1833. It is actually the last of the letters, unfortunately. They did not make it to 4, they only did 3. So the historical introduction concludes, although the March segment promised future installments would provide some instructions upon the regulation of the church, and this third portion of the letter ends with the note to be continued, no further issue of the paper contained further installments of the letter. No manuscript versions of the 3 letter segments are extant. So I'm sorry, you were promised 4, but you get 3 for the price of 4. I guess that sounded ideal. After this, we get a letter from William W. Phelps. This is published in the Evening and Morning Star, and the historical introduction summarizes this very nicely. It says, on May 1st, 1834, William W. Phelps wrote this letter to update church leaders in Kirtland, Ohio, on the situation of the saints who had been expelled from Jackson County, Missouri. In November of 1833, and who now resided mainly in Clay County, Missouri. The letter highlights continuing tensions between saints and the residents of Jackson County, tensions that grew as reports circulated that church members intended to regain their Jackson County lands, which the saints did, in fact, try to do. Church leaders in Missouri petitioned Missouri Governor Daniel Dunklin for military assistance, but the governor did not believe he had the authority to maintain a militia force to protect church members from potential violence after they returned to possess their lands. So that's the open letter you get there. Next thing we get is minutes from a meeting on the 3rd of May, 1834. So let's read them out because there's some very interesting things here. Very interesting things here. It says here, Kirtland, Ohio, May 3rd, 1834. Minutes of a conference of the Elders of the Church of Christ, which church was organized in the township of Fayette, Seneca County, New York, on the 6th of April, A.D. 1830. The conference came to order, and Joseph Smith, Jr. was chosen moderator, and Frederick G. Williams and Oliver Cowdery were appointed clerks. After prayer, the conference proceeded to discuss the subject of names and appellations, when a motion was made by Sidney Rigdon and seconded by Newell K. Whitney, that this church be known hereafter by the name, the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Appropriate remarks were delivered by some of the members, after which the motion was put by the moderator and passed by unanimous voice. Resolved that this conference recommend to the conferences and churches abroad that in making out and transmitting minutes of their proceedings, such minutes and proceedings be made out under the above title. Resolved that these minutes be signed by the moderator and clerks and published in the Evening and Morning Star, Joseph Smith, Jr., moderator. Footnote 1 for this. David Whitmer, who was living in Missouri in 1834, later said that changing the church's name came solely at Sidney Rigdon's instigation because the minutes capture none of the discussion surrounding the change. The extent of Rigdon and others' advocacy for the change is unknown. So there you have it, kids. The church is now no longer the Church of Christ. It is now the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And yeah, you can see where this is going. But anyway, historical introduction for this. We will go in order. At this May 3rd, 1834 conference, with Joseph Smith serving as moderator, the elders unanimously passed a motion that the name of the church be changed to the Church of the Latter-day Saints. The minutes do not give the reasoning behind this change, and a few other records discuss it. But 2 editorials published in the May and June 1834 issues of the Evening and Morning Star provide some possible reasons. According to the editorials, which were written by Oliver Cowdery, the change occurred in part because church leaders believed it reasonable that God, quote, should call his people by a name which would distinguish them from all other people, unquote. This suggests that the name change may have occurred to avoid confusion with Alexander Campbell's Restorationist movement, which was often referred to as the Disciples of Christ or the Church of Christ. So you got 2 of the same name. Some further into Cowdery's editorials, we get, according to Cowdery's editorials, a new name was also meant to represent the people of God, either those immediately dwelling with him in glory or those on earth walking according to his commandments, namely saints. Designating these saints as Latter-day Saints presumably distinguished them from the ancient saints or early Christians, while also highlighting church members' beliefs about the imminent return of Jesus Christ on the earth. But the Latter-day Saint idea is not new. So from the historical introduction again, whatever the reason for the change, the term Latter-day Saints was not entirely new. In September 1833, for example, a Council of the United Firm decided to begin a new periodical titled The Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate, and a letter in the April 1834 issue of the Evening and Morning Star talked about the organization of the Church of Christ, or the Church of the Latter-day Saints. So this term had been used leading up to this. But the name wasn't really official until 1838. That's 4 years later, so we get this. Despite the name change, some both within and without the church continued to refer to the organization as the Church of Christ, and its members as Mormonites or Mormons. But after this conference, the use of the name of the Church of Latter-day Saints became increasingly prevalent. In 1838, a revelation changed the name of the church to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, thus combining the two earlier names. And footnote 7 for this says, many outside the church referred to members as Mormonites, but Cowdery's editorial declared that the church, quote, did not accept the title, nor would its members wear it as their name. And that one's for you, President Nelson. We don't do Mormon. And we would like you to call us by our right name. Thank you very much. That is something when President Nelson became the prophet, big emphasis on that. Thus, we conclude that the name of the church did not come out as a bolt out of the blue in 1838. It was actually decided and more or less ratified at a conference years before that. So I found that to be a very interesting meeting for this. All right, the next thing we get here is a deed from John and Alice Johnson. So the John Johnson farm, as you know, is a major part of church history. And this is from the 5th of May, 1834. It's found in the Geauga County deed records, and it's probably the handwriting of William Wilbur. We don't really know. Wilbur. Anyway, he was the county recorder, and so we assume that this is his handwriting at the time. And he has very nice handwriting, if that's the case, I will add. And what happened here is what's going to happen to the other two deeds that you will see here shortly. Basically, they deeded their property to Joseph as part of the United Order. But we also get this from the historical introduction. This 5th of May deed from the Johnsons to Joseph Smith was eventually deemed invalid, likely because it did not take into account the lot owned by the Methodist Episcopal Church, which occupied the northeast corner of the property described. In addition, the Johnsons did not actually have a deed to the property at this time, as it was held by Newell K. Whitney until Whitney deeded it to them in 1836. On the 4th of January, 1837, the Johnsons again deeded the land to Joseph Smith, this time excluding the land owned by the Methodist Episcopal Church. Whoopsie, you've deeded land that doesn't belong to you. So, I guess it happens. But yeah, they said, let's try that again, and this time we want to give away somebody else's land instead. So, but this kind of thing where it was deeded to the prophet, where it's found in the Geauga County records, William Wilbur, also happens for a deed from Frederick and Rebecca Williams. So this is Frederick G. Williams. And then we get yet another deed for other land from Fred and Becca. So they also did the same thing, giving their property to the United Order. So 3 deeds, same idea. The next thing we're going to get is very interesting. I'm loving this one. This is a letter to Emma Smith. This was written on the 18th of May, 1834. So this is written in Joseph Smith's own hand, and it comes while he's in Zion's camp. So from the historical introduction we get, after organizing into companies of 12 and consecrating money into a general fund to cover camp expenses, the combined group departed New Portage on the 7th of May and proceeded through several towns, including Chippewa, Wooster, Mansfield, Bellefontaine, and Dayton, Ohio, before entering Indiana on Saturday, 17th of May. They set up camp in Richmond so that they would not have to travel on the Sabbath, walking as many as 30 miles per day, many of those on the expedition, and sore and blistered feet upon arriving in Indiana, according to Heber C. Kimball. Our stockings were wet with blood. Further into the historical introduction we get, on the night of September 17th, Sylvester Smith, quote, lost the spirit of peace and called fellow camp member John S. Carter an old jackass. According to one report, when Joseph Smith intervened, Sylvester Smith stated that he was not afraid of Joseph Smith and, quote, would contradict him in the face of all present, unquote. Other reports indicate that Joseph Smith then told the camp that if this rebellious spirit continued, quote, they would meet with misfortunes, difficulties, and hindrances, unquote. According to Heber C. Kimball's story, the next morning, the same morning that Joseph Smith wrote this letter to Emma, the horses of the camp were lame. Quote, the brethren then deeply realized the effects of discord, unquote, Kimball reported, and they humbly petitioned God for a restoration of their horses' health. All the horses were immediately healed, quote, with the exception of one Sylvester Smith's, which soon afterwards died. The camp then held church services in which they partook of the sacrament and heard preaching by Lyman Johnson and Orson Hyde. All right, so everybody's horse was okay except for the guy who, I guess, got in Joseph's space. His horse died. Kind of a bummer there. Maybe best not to talk about it. From the historical introduction, it says, Joseph Smith did not discuss any of the camp's difficulties, but instead informed Emma that all was well with the expedition. The letter shows Joseph Smith's concern for his family and his joy in receiving letters from them. It was mailed on the 19th of May. So, given that these are really rare, here is the letter. I'll just read it off to you. 19th, or rather the 18th of May, Camp of Israel in Indiana State, town of Richmond. My dear wife, meeting being over, I sit down in my tent to write a few lines to you and let you know that you are on my mind, and that I am sensible of the duties of a husband and father, that I am well, and I pray God to let his blessings to rest upon you and the children, and all that are around you, until I return to your society. The few lines you wrote and sent by the hand of Brother Lyman gave me satisfaction and comfort, and I hope you will continue to communicate to me by your own hand, for this is a consolation to me, that to converse with you in this way in my lonely moments, which is not easily described. I will endeavor to write every Sunday if I can, and let you know how I am. And Brother Frederick G. Frederick will write to Oliver, and give him the names of the places we passed through, and a history of our journey from time to time, so that it will not be necessary for me to endeavor to write. But I feel a satisfaction to write a few lines with my own hand in this way. I can have the privilege to communicate some of my feelings that I should not dare to reveal, as you know that my situation is very critical. One Brother Jenkins and William Jesse and George are all well and are humble, are determined to be faithful, and finally all the Kirtland brethren are well and cannot fail. I must close, for I cannot write on my knees sitting on the ground to edification. Oh, may the blessings of God rest upon you, is the prayer of your husband until death. And then Joseph Smith's signature, as you can see here, is actually cut away. So just an image here that I really appreciate when these sort of things happen. He doesn't have anywhere to write, so he just has a piece of paper and a quill, and he gets on his knees in the dirt, and he's sort of drawing this on his knees, as much as he can. They don't have a nice camp, so I just find that interesting. We get a second letter to Emma. This one is found in Letter Book 2. It's actually the handwriting of James Mulholland, so this is just a copy. The historical introduction says this. On the 4th of June, 1834, Joseph Smith dictated this letter to his wife, Emma Hale Smith, from the eastern banks of the Mississippi River in Illinois, where he and the rest of the camp of Israel had arrived earlier that morning. In the roughly 2.5 weeks that had passed since he wrote to Emma on the 18th of May, Joseph Smith and the expedition had traveled through Indiana and into Illinois, frequently using the National Road, a thoroughfare that ran from Maryland through Indiana and into Illinois. The National Road. I wonder if that's got a freeway paved over it. Anyway, the group was 170 strong at this point as they picked up men along the way. So a fun fact here. Joseph Noble later remembered, quote, "I never heard of our being numbered less than twice our actual number," unquote. So basically, a lot of the people they were like, "There's 20,000 of them. There's 10,000 of them. There's 600 of them." Like it's. I just find it funny because like everybody always doubled our number. I don't know what that was all about. Anyway, so where are we? Well, from the historical introduction we get, after arriving at the Mississippi River, the group had to wait for a ferry before crossing. Using the extra time, Joseph Smith dictated this letter to Emma, detailing the camp's organization, the food its members ate, the health of individual members, the attention the expedition received from curious onlookers, and the burial mounds they discovered in Illinois that, for Joseph Smith, confirmed the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith also shared his fears that he did not have enough men to protect the saints once they were restored to their Jackson County lands. He expressed hope that members of the church would quickly move to Missouri to strengthen the church there. In general, Joseph Smith downplayed the difficulties the expedition was encountering, probably to alleviate any concerns Emma might have about him. Which I can just say, being a married guy, yeah, I would totally do the same thing. I'm not telling you what's going on. Like, he'd freak out, so we don't. And moms, just so you know, when your sons ride home from their missions, they're not telling you the truth either. They're not telling you the whole thing. I mean, they're not lying to you. I shouldn't say that, but yeah, we're not going to tell you that stuff. Crazy. Anyway, so I get a kick out of that. I feel like kinship to this man. All right. So from the letter itself, a few things. I quote, "The whole of our journey, in the midst of so large a company of social, honest men and sincere men wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity." Footnote 14 is where we meet Zelph. On the 3rd of June, the camp of Israel passed through the vicinity of what is now Valley City, Illinois, where several members of the camp climbed a large mound. At the top, they uncovered the skeletal remains of an individual Joseph Smith reportedly identified as Zelph, a, quote, white Lamanite, unquote. Archaeologists have since identified the mound as Naples Russell Mound number 8 and have classified it as a Hopewell burial mound of the Middle Woodland period of the North American pre-Columbian era, which is roughly 50 BC to AD 250. I'll let you do the math on that. 50 BC to 250 years after Christ, or Anno Domini, is when it was scientifically dated. And there you meet Zelph. Now, if you don't know, there is a group of people that do something called Zelph on a shelf, which means it's kind of like taking all the things about the church that might be hard to believe, and you just, I'm just going to put it on the shelf and not worry about it. But then they're going to actually pull those things off the shelf and worry about it, or their shelf is going to break, right? And so Zelph has become this sort of contemporary figure of sorts, kind of a character of sorts in today's world. So I find that kind of fun. And I think it's a very clever name, quite frankly. I get a kick out of that kind of stuff. Anyway, enough about me. The next thing we get here is a declaration from the 21st of June, 1834. It was written by Orson Hyde and two other unidentified scribes. We just don't know whose handwriting it is. This copy was carried back home, so it has been in continual church custody. It's signed by many others, including Joseph Smith, Orson Hyde, and other people. And we get this from the historical introduction. On the 21st of June, 1834, a delegation of about 6 men from Clay and Ray counties, Missouri, came to the camp of Israel, which was positioned about 4 miles beyond Fishing River on the land owned by church member John Cooper. The delegation met with camp members at the request of John F. Ryland, a Ray County judge who was trying to mediate a settlement between Jackson County, Missouri residents and the church members they had expelled in November of 1833. As a result of the discussions, Joseph Smith and others in the camp prepared this declaration, which was prefaced by Clay County Sheriff Cornelius Gillam's statement verifying that the declaration covered, quote, the substance of what passed between them, unquote. So they come armed with not only the sheriff saying, yeah, that's true, but also their declaration of what actually happened and like what their intentions are. However, during the same time, we get the Fishing River story. If you don't know this one, I will repeat it to you. The negotiations notwithstanding, groups of men continued to threaten camp members as they traveled. The most serious threat came on the 19th of June when the expedition reached Fishing River, approximately 10 miles from Liberty. As the group set up camp in an elevated piece of land between the Little Fishing and Big Fishing rivers, they were approached by 5 armed men who warned that the camp would, quote, see hell before morning, and claimed that nearly 400 men from Ray, Lafayette, Clay, and Jackson counties were waiting to attack that night. However, a tremendous thunderstorm raged that night, dropping huge hailstones and swelling Fishing River to nearly 40 feet deep, preventing the threatened attack. Camp members interpreted the storm as providential. For example, Nathan Baldwin later recalled that, quote, all were conscious that God was engaged in the conflict and thankful that they were under his special care and kind protection, unquote. It's a very famous story that is told about how they were more or less spared without doing a thing. Sort of God fighting their battles for them. We get this is very interesting. I didn't know this part before I read these papers, but this is a speech from Joseph Smith that apparently had a very deep effect on people. So here we go. According to one account, perceiving that Gillum and the other delegation members were gentlemen that appeared to possess humane and republican feelings, interesting, Joseph Smith gave, quote, an open and frank avowal of the camp's views and intentions in immigrating to this country with their arms, unquote. Reuben McBride, a member of the expedition, later stated that the delegation was, quote, very much affected by Joseph Smith's words, and some shed tears, unquote. Thereafter, Orson Hyde put in writing the same sentiments that Joseph Smith had expressed verbally, including a proposed statement to the settlement to the difficulty, and the statement was signed by Joseph Smith and 5 other church members. 5 men from the Missouri delegation signed the statement as well, and Gillum provided a declaration of his purpose in approaching the camp. So apparently Joseph gave this amazing speech that had people in tears, I guess. Lastly, from this we get, by that time, the camp of Israel was beginning to disband in accordance with the June 22nd, 1834 revelation that stated camp participants no longer needed to redeem Zion. Joseph Smith hoped that the disbandment, which was hastened by an outbreak of cholera in the camp, would alleviate the prejudices and fears of those in Clay County. No armed confrontation between the camp and Missouri citizens ever took place. After the initial crisis passed, the Upper Missouri Enquirer published the declaration with Gillum's statement of purpose on the 2nd of July, 1834. And thus ends Zion's Camp. So if this is a little long of an episode, that's why. This is a lot of Zion's Camp stuff. And I've only taken anecdotes from official histories that we have pertaining to Joseph Smith. Again, I know there's more out there. We're just sticking to the Joseph Smith papers. You and me, sticking to the Joseph Smith papers. Our very last thing we have for today then is section 105 from the Doctrine and Covenants. The earliest copy that we get is from Revelation Book 1 in John Whitmer's hand. It's a very clean copy. We also get William W. Phelps's diary and notebook, which is actually in Frederick G. Williams's hand, which is interesting. We get a copy in Revelation Book 2, which is written by Oliver Cowdery, with a bunch of corrections by Oliver Cowdery. So that's what you get in Revelation Book 2. Newell K. Whitney has a copy, which is at his papers at BYU. William W. Phelps has his own copy. Wilford Woodruff has the Book of Revelations that he kept. He put a copy in there. Willard Richards has one in his pocket companion. John Corll has a copy of it. The Book of the Law of the Lord contains a version of this, and the handwriting is of Robert B. Thompson. So that's in the Book of the Law of the Lord. And then we also get it in the Manuscript History of the Church, but it is not found in the original Doctrine and Covenants. So take that. Circumstantially to this, what's our introduction here? Well, our earliest copy gives Revelation given 22nd June, 1834, Clay County, Missouri. We get the same thing for the Hyde-Pratt Notebook, for Revelation Book 2, Wilford Woodruff's Book of Revelations, Richard's Pocket Companion, and the Corll copy. They all just say Revelation, and then they give the date and the place. Newell K. Whitney copy says something a little different. It says Revelation given 22nd of June, 1834, at Fishing River, relative to Zion. And that's the same for William W. Phelps's copy and what you get out of the Book of the Law of the Lord. So there seems to be kind of like two introductions. One tells you that you're at Fishing River. The other one tells you the county you're in. And then we get this from the manuscript history. We get a story about how Lyman Smith was accidentally shot when a horse pistol went off, and he recovered in 3 days. So careful where you point your guns, should you keep them loaded, and all those other gun safety things, I should tell you. Then we get this from the manuscript history itself. I marched my company into a grove nearby and formed in a circle, with Gillum in the center. Gillum commenced by saying that he had heard that Joseph Smith was in the camp, and if so, he would like to see him. I arose and replied, I am the man. This was the first time that I had been discovered or made known to my enemies since I left Kirtland. Gillum then gave us some instruction concerning the manners, customs, and dispositions of the people, etc., and what course we ought to pursue to secure their favor and protection, making certain inquiries to which we replied, which were afterwards published and will appear under date of publication July 2nd. I received the following. And then we get the revelation. Modern section headings are also different. So in 1981, we get mob violence against the saints in Missouri had increased and organized bodies from several counties and declared their intention to destroy the people. The prophet had come from Kirtland at the head of a party known as Zion's Camp, bringing clothing and provisions. While this party was encamped on Fishing River, the prophet received the revelation. But in 2013, it changes. It says, under the leadership of the prophet, saints from Ohio and other areas marched to Missouri in an expedition later known as Zion's Camp. Their purpose was to escort the expelled Missouri saints back to their lands in Jackson County. Missourians who had previously persecuted the saints feared retaliation from Zion's Camp and preemptively attacked some saints living in Clay County, Missouri. After the Missouri governor withdrew his promise to support the saints, Joseph Smith received this revelation. Those are two very different stories being told. So that's what you get out of modern section headings. So then we get the rest from the historical introduction, and we get this. Joseph Smith dictated this 22nd of June, 1834 revelation at the campsite of the Camp of Israel on the property of John Cooper, a church member who lived about 4 miles north of Fishing River in Clay County, Missouri. The revelation told members of the Camp of Israel that for the present they were no longer required to redeem Zion by restoring church members to their Jackson County, Missouri lands. By the 22nd of June, it had become apparent that church members would not be able to enter Jackson County without bloodshed, particularly since Governor Daniel Dunklin seemed reluctant to call out the militia to escort them into the county. One resident of Lexington County, Missouri, reported on the 20th of June, quote, should they cross the river into Jackson County, there will be a battle and probably much bloodshed. And further down to this, we get the following day, Joseph Smith held a council to determine what steps the camp should take. During the council, he dictated this revelation, which according to camp participant Joseph Holbrook, quote, showed the mind of God concerning the redemption of Zion, unquote. According to the revelation, the Lord did not require the camp to redeem Zion through military force at the time. The revelation stated that before Zion could be redeemed, the church's elders needed to obtain an endowment of power in the house of the Lord that was being constructed in Kirtland, Ohio. The revelation also declared that Zion could have been redeemed had church members living outside of Missouri been willing to provide financial support to the Camp of Israel expedition. It was very loud about that. Like, you didn't give us enough money to make this work. So what now? Well, the revelation went on to iterate directions given in previous revelations that saints outside of Missouri were to purchase lands in Jackson County and the surrounding areas and gather to those locations. At some point, the revelation intimated, the armies of Israel might be great enough for the saints to reclaim their lost Jackson County lands, but until then, they should live humbly and peaceably with their neighbors. The revelation also stated that the Lord accepted the offering of those who had participated in the camp. Some camp participants later remembered the revelation indicating that their offering was like the biblical patriarch Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac. But that comparison is not in the revelation, suggesting that perhaps Joseph Smith made that declaration to the camp independently. So, How did it go? Okay, we made it all the way here. Not a shot was fired. We didn't get our lands back. If you want to call it that, it was a failure. They didn't get the money. They didn't get the people. They didn't get their lands back. Zions camp didn't do what they said that they were going to do. The revelation went on to reiterate directions given to previous revelations. That's not what I wanted to say. Historical introduction then gives us this. After camp members heard the revelation, some accepted it as the word of the Lord and rejoiced. Nathan Baldwin, for example, recalled that the revelation was the most acceptable to me of anything I had ever heard before, the gospel being the exception. Others were not so enthusiastic. According to William Cahoon, quote, many in the camp murmured because we were not permitted at this time to restore our brethren and sisters to their homes and defend them there at all hazards, unquote. George A. Smith remembered that, quote, several of the brethren apostatized because they were not going to have the privilege of fighting, unquote. Nathan Tanner also recalled that some declared, quote, they had rather die than to return without a fight, unquote, and then gave vent to their wrath on a patch of pawpaw brush some distance from the camp, mowing it down like grass. Regardless of these attitudes, the revelation, coupled with a visit from Gillen's delegation, apparently convinced Joseph Smith to disband the camp, a process that began shortly thereafter. The dispersal was hastened by an outbreak of cholera, which some camp members interpreted as punishment from God for their rebellious attitudes. Expedition leaders gave official discharges to camp members in early July. Footnote 8 for this introduction says, Joseph Smith and others spent a good portion of February, March, and April trying to raise money to recruit participants for the Camp of Israel. The accounts of the expedition indicate that church members contributed only a little over $330, necessitating camp members to donate nearly $1,700 of their own money for the expedition's expenses. And while a February 1834 revelation had instructed Joseph Smith and others to try to recruit as many as 500 men for the expedition, only 205 actually went. So those numbers are abysmal, I will say. So it was tough, and some people did not take it well, and they left the church and mowed the lawn on their way out the door, apparently, according to them. Some content and footnotes. I'm going to be pretty brief with this because it's been sort of exhausted through everything else that we've talked about. And a lot of the footnotes we've already discussed already. So, but we do get this from the revelation. Be very faithful and prayerful and humble before me, and reveal not the things which I have revealed unto them. Talk not of judgment, boast not of faith, nor of mighty works. Footnote 18 says, George A. Smith reported that on the 16th of June, Martin Harris, quote, boasted to the brethren that he could handle snakes with perfect safety, unquote, and then offered his foot to a snake and was bitten. The Sangamo Journal also reported that a member of the expedition, quote, who appeared to be a leader, stated to a respectable citizen of this town, which was Springfield, Illinois, that he had himself performed more miracles than were recorded in the Old and New Testaments, unquote. So don't brag about it. Yeah, don't do that. Anyway, the text also gives us this. There has been a day of calling, but the time has come for a day of choosing. And let those be chosen that are worthy, and it shall be manifest unto my servant Joseph by the voice of the Spirit, those who are chosen, and they shall be sanctified. And inasmuch as they follow the counsels which they receive, they shall have power over many days to accomplish all things pertaining to Zion. Footnote 27 for this says, the following day a council of high priests met in order to choose some of the first elders to receive their endowments, being appointed by the voice of the Spirit through Brother Joseph Smith, Jr., President of the Church of Christ. And thus begins a new era in the history of the church, wherein you have the people in the Zion's camp start becoming the first people to receive endowments. They start becoming the first people to become apostles. And a lot of them, well, some of them, I should say, later became presidents of the church, as in like the first four. So pretty significant, this camp. And I have given you the Joseph Smith version of it. And as I've said, we've made it all the way to Documents Volume 3. We've also made it through a lot of the journals, and the original histories have been done. But this is a major change from this point on. So from now on, we're going to be talking mostly about sort of the saints regrouping, regathering themselves. And then we're going to get into some major things about priesthood revelations, the Kirtland Temple itself, the dedication of it, and the manifestations that came from that. So stick with us over the next 2 episodes, and we'll see you next time on Filling in the History.